programs, but I'm wondering if maybe you shouldn't have them a little bit more specific. That was a vain attempt to try and sell more copies of my book, by the way. I was great to see that the idea that relationships are the base that you're allowed to use your job, but I only heard from the students that they were part of a process of monitoring how well the learners were actually doing those 7 things. And I was really pleased to hear that from the students. Obviously their lecturers are doing this. I'm just saying there's a means of systematising that and putting it into a structural format. The answers to all your questions are in fact in listening to your students. They actually are answering the questions, and the best thing that I can say about all those questions that were asked, of the panel asked, is that don't ask me, ask your students, and also ask each other. I'm a great believer that all the solutions to all the problems that we collectively face are all known within the room somewhere. You don't need outside experts. Maybe what the role of the outside expert is to throw a rock into the pond, and then the ripples will go out, and ripples will disturb things. And it's in those places of disturbance that you'll find the answers. You got some good stuff today. I think I heard some wonderful stuff in that last session. And the panel were asking some really neat questions, and I want to go through a couple of those questions. You know, how do we relate by distance learning? I listened to a person the other day at the from the University of Auckland, who was talking about the role of technology in schools, distance learning being one of those technologies, or part of the technology, part of it all. And what he was saying was that above all, the technology is an adjunct to learning. Central to the learning was human relationships. I hadn't paid him to say it. I thought it was great to hear. And I've heard it again and again here. I want to come to the punchline in a minute. How do we call out deficit thinking? Use narratives for reflection. And what I was saying to somebody before was that the layers, the relationships that are established between students and lecturers should be the same that are established within the institution between leaders and other leaders. So leaders in the institution don't need to be administrative leaders. You can employ people to do administration who are very good at it. Often we as academics are not great at being administrators. I'm a very good example of that. I'm a lousy administrator, but I'm a reasonably good teacher. And so what's best to do is to get me teaching and get an administrator to do the administrative work. And so what you can do in that form is allow people to reflect upon their practices. Remember, it's not holding hands. Relationships is not about holding hands. It's about allowing us to do our job, not to transmit, but act as leaders of learning. And we can see how well we're going as leaders of learning by those 7 dimensions, that Gapilsio model, GPILSEO, is just an acronym, a mnemonic, to remember those things. And like my friend from Tonga, I want to finish with a story which will only take 5 minutes. Or it could take half an hour, depending on how you feel about it. Can I put this up? Oh, there we go. Did that. That's better. Now I can stand up straight. I don't have to lean over. Oh, how to handle large numbers. Here's the answer to how to handle large numbers, how to call out deficit thinking, how to improve our completion rates, and above all, somebody snuck in, I think it was the second person on the panel, snuck in a really, really wonderful question, and that is, how do we activate Indigenous knowledges? How do we activate Indigenous knowledges in a modern, I don't know, non-traditional classroom structure, or these sorts of organisations, institutions, which seem antithetical to an Indigenous knowledge base? How do we activate? How do we enact? How do we act as leaders of learning? I'll tell you a little story. I was in a classroom one time,